the main invasion engine for the United States is our government. Straight up, the life that you had before is over. And so you will either adjust to it, and there's a high chance you'll do well, or you won't adjust to it, and there's a high chance you're going to die. If you're in a big city, it's time to get out. Obviously, it's way past that time. Those cities are clearly being taken. If you're not going to fight for it, if you are not going to fight, you must leave or you will be taken. This is coming, whether it's economic collapse or these invasions that are going on. You're going to have to fight or flee. If you freeze, you'll probably die, or you'll certainly be a slave. And so what are you going to do? That depends on your personal situation.
All right. So we're here with Michael Yon. Michael Yon is a former Green Beret, independent war correspondent. You might have seen him come up recently because he's been extensively covering the migration situation, going down to the Darien Gap, showing people exactly what's going on there. Doug's always saying, we don't really know what's going on. We want boots on the ground information. And so luckily we have Michael Yon, who is kind of the king of boots on the ground here to help us answer some questions. So Michael, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me on. I'm in Okinawa right now, which is another battlefront, key terrain, a vital terrain in the future, and as it has been in the past. And what I've been doing since many, many years is spending a lot of time in key places like Netherlands, which is a very important place, Panama, of course, Colombia, just long list, but I typically go to where the action is. Not necessarily action if it's just people fighting each other. I'm not interested in that. Let them fight. I mean, it's just, war is war, but there are some wars that are much more important than others. And so that's what I'm looking at here in Okinawa and Taiwan. And of course, I spent more than 18 years in Asia looking at various issues, running around China and that sort of thing. And of course, this is all coming to a head. We can see that.
Why Okinawa in particular right now, Michael?
I'm here for some meetings and another thing as well. Occasionally, I just take a halt and study for about a month or so and just go quiet. And that's what I'm doing now. I'm in my quiet phase. I showed up with a bunch of books. I like to just go somewhere and be, but Okinawa in and of itself is also very important, as is Honshu, of course, Japan, Greater Japan, the larger island. I've been here looking at the mRNA jabs, the new ones that are coming out, spending a lot of time with people like Yasufumi Murakami. He's a doctor. He's a virologist and immunologist by training, but he's actually a professor of oncology at Tokyo University. Been spending a lot of time with these scientists and doctors because there's a new jab that's coming out, and we can clearly see that these jabs are not for our well-being. And this latest one is, according to Dr. Murakami and others, it's self-amplifying. In other words, once you get it, it literally is designed to spread. And so, yeah, these guys are very interesting. Sometimes when Masako Ganaha and actually, she just headed over to Honshu. She's giving a speech tomorrow at Yasukuni Shrine. But these scientists that we spend so much time with are very concerned about Japan because the death rate here is going through the roof, just like it is in other places. Of interest, too, is, for instance, the Chinese have been coming over. They bought a lot of crematoria, a lot of the capacity for funeral capacity, which gives them actually, in addition to they've raised the prices for Japanese funerals, gives them also a lot of intelligence. I mean, when people die, you get a lot of information about, a lot of information. And so we've been looking into things like that. Actually, the problem set here in Japan is and I would argue, and I think I could defend this argument, that Japan is our most important ally in the world. And although the Japanese don't know that and Americans don't seem to know that, but I think it's quite obvious. I've written 3 books about Chinese information war that are only in Japanese. I wrote them in English, actually, but I wrote them only for Japanese. And those are maybe 10 years old now. And they sold quite well, but I'm not sure how much it changed the mindset. It changed some people, waking them up to the intense information war that Japan is under. Of course, information war is the highest form of warfare. But anyway, why am I here? This is absolutely vital terrain. China is on the march. I go all over the world, whether it's Georgia or Armenia or the other Georgia in Asia next to Armenia, and all over Europe, all the Central American countries. China is on the march. I was recently over in Bahamas. They've got a big port right off the coast of Florida. They're building a giant embassy there. They're doing similar over in Antigua, same in Grenada. They're making it. I was just down in El Salvador looking at they've got a big library. I would recommend El Salvador for vacations, by the way, which sounds strange, but it was quite nice. And it felt quite safe, actually. And
Well, the criminals are locked up, I guess. That would be.
yeah, tattoo on your face is off to prison. And so, and I see a lot of those guys coming through the Darien Gap, not Salvadorians, of course, but Venezuelans and others. Downtown in El Salvador, they just built a 7-floor museum, and it's built with China aid, right? And the Chinese Communist flag is flying right downtown, right in front of that library. I spent a half a day in it. Okay, it's 7 floors. It's a beautiful place. You go inside though, and it's a bunch of really high-tech video games like Top Gun stuff, big screens and the pedals. And I mean, it's not like we used to play Space Invaders or something. Not that I got to play that much of those things, but they've got these high-speed driving games. And for the El Salvadoran children to play those games, they give you something to study for 30 minutes. You have to take a test, and then you can play the game for an hour. So you can see how that goes. And so as we went, when you come into the library, you have to take a tour. So they found that it was Masako Ganaha and we went there. And because we've been studying Chinese information warfare, like archaeological warfare, museum warfare, library warfare, statues. I mean, I've been looking at this all over the world. And so we had to have a tour guide. So they gave us a tour guide. They found one that spoke English. And I kept asking, like, where's the physics section? Where's the mathematics? Where's the MBA stuff and all that? And, finally we found some small section on mathematics and that sort of thing. But mostly it was about just nonsense. It was like Game of Thrones and just total mind Doritos, It's like, and so it's a little brainwashing center there. Of course, again, Chinese Communist Party is on the march. A lot of military people see that clearly. Actually, it was a military officer who happens to be my cousin. He's a retired military officer now. He and actually other military officers would tell me over and over and over since the early 90s and mid 90s, study China. And because they've never steered me wrong, I started studying China quite a lot and going there, right? And now I see the threat is quite intense, getting indigenous groups riled up all over the place. Hey, you're Chinese. They're trying to do the same here in Okinawa, right? You go to, say, Honduras, and they've got an archaeological dig there, and they're trying to persuade indigenous people there that you're actually from Chinese descent, right? They're trying to persuade Mayans in various countries that they're of Chinese descent, doing the same with the American Indians. I was just up in Canada and Yellowknife and Toronto and Vancouver. The indigenous people up in Yellowknife, just like 250 miles from the Arctic Circle. Actually, there was a ton of Africans and Asians there. I say Asians, I mean like Bangladeshis, not Japanese. Well, Japanese go, but they go for vacation. But they're up there. This is clearly part of. There's that, the Northern Passage that I'm sure you're well aware of up there, that the Chinese and the Russians are working on. They're using information war to split off the indigenous people so that they can deal with them separately, like Nunavut, right, and that sort of thing. And so, and they're using these many different cultures that are invading our countries, like Canada. Canada's, I would say, actually at this point, effectively gone. And
the immigration to Canada is about, if I'm remembering correctly, it's a country of 40 million people. They're getting about 1.5 million immigrants every year, mostly from the subcontinent. Am I right?
Yeah, and China. And so, like, I left from the Bahamas, spent, I don't know, a couple of weeks there looking at that situation, and went to Vancouver. And no, I went to Toronto. And I stayed with an Army officer for almost 2 weeks, more than a week. And his whole neighborhood was Indian, actually. A lot of Sikhs, a lot of Hindus. I spent a year in India and a year in Nepal and a lot of years in that general area. So I can easily tell them apart, right? So I went to a big Sikh temple and I went inside a big Hindu temple, and they're all right there. And it's interesting. And that's in that area. When I landed from Bahamas to Toronto, there was a big welcome area there for Ukrainians, a bunch of chairs and welcome signs in English and in Ukrainian. And I mean, I took a few photos and it was just amazing. They're literally killing their country. And information war, of course, it allowed this door to just open. And at this point, I think the will to live is gone for Canada. They've got the MAID program. You may have heard of that, medical assistance in dying. They're literally putting people to death on the same. You can go to the doctor. Hey, my knee hurts. Hey, you want to get put to death? Sure, you're gone. It's unbelievable. It's like I don't know. It's
we'd
the
like to
worst
hope,
books in
we'd
the
like to
world.
hope that that changes if they kick Trudeau out, but it might be hard to kick Trudeau out at this point too.
No, he's nothing. I mean, he's just a meat puppet. I mean, he's what's called a dog king in old information war. A dog king, these things happened in Africa, and they also happened in Scandinavia. It's when like one king runs off another king, and they put off or kills him, and they install a dog as a king, an actual dog, and give him a throne and all that. And they have an interpreter, and they say, well, this is your new king. And the subject's like, well, that's a dog. Like, well, it's your king. So it demoralizes the people who have a dog king, and it emboldens your enemies. So you see Biden, Kamala, all this, these are dog kings. And the Fetterman guy and AOC, they're clown world. And so no matter what happens to Trudeau, he's nothing literally but a condom for the globalist. It doesn't matter. When he's gone, it's irrelevant. He'll be installed with somebody. Same over in Netherlands. I spend significant time in the Netherlands watching the same thing. I was there for the 2023 elections, and I must have driven like 700 miles around little Netherlands. I was bouncing off the borders, but I was talking with farmers and politicians and just people. And I was there with the FVD, Forum for Democracy. It's one of their parties. And I was just getting the inside scoop from them, and I was with them on election night. But as I drove around the country with part of the time with one of their guys, there was these BBB signs all over the place. BBB means Bodenburgerbeweging, which means Farmers People's Movement, or I'm sorry, Farmers People's Movement. And it's almost like German. I speak German, but Bodenburgerbeweging, right? So it's the Farmer People's Movement. And what was interesting about it is within like 5 or 10 seconds of looking at that sign, I realized it was a Trojan horse, because information war is is one of the main things I study. And how did I know? Because the signs were be better, right? So all these signs, there were signs all over the place, all over Netherlands. And they were mostly in farmers' fields next to the highways and the roads, back roads, highways, everything. And it was be better. And I looked at that and I was like, be better, who's this? And he's like, Bodenburger Beweging. And I said, that's clearly WEF. I mean, that's World Economic Forum. That's globalist right there. And he goes, yeah, we know that, but we're having a hard time persuading the farmers of that. And I know some of the Dutch farmers. One's named Jordan. He's one of those giant Jack and the Beanstalk dairy farmers. Must drink good milk. And I said to Jordan, what do you think about this BBB party? He's like, Michael, they're great. I know Carolyn Vanderplas. She's the leader, actually. Her name's Carolyn Vanderplas. And he's like, I've met her, and I'm like, something's wrong, man. It's written right on their signs, be better, build back better. You know what I mean? Because they tell you who they are. You just have to listen, because they're going to show you and they're going to tell you, right? And he just wouldn't believe it. And I went on with the Jordan Peterson show. And when I was in Netherlands, I went on with Ava Vlardingerbroek, and he asked us what's going on, and Ava agreed, and that was the first time I met Ava, was when we went on the show together, and she actually agreed. She was actually filling in more details, and I said to Jordan straight up, that's a obvious Trojan horse. And sure enough, they won by a landslide, took a lot of seats and that sort of thing. Suddenly, FVD was out the window. Those are the guys I spent the election. I mean, they still got nominal, nothing really. But the BBB just cleaned the table. And now people see it. It wasn't very long. It took a few months, and they started to see, hey, she's already compromising on this. I'm like, it's on their signs, be better. So, I mean, that's all you have to do is listen with an open heart and an open mind.
Well, we're taking it from the top down, and we could cover the whole world on that basis. Well, it's a little bit like Yuri Bezimov said in that famous interview. First is demoralization. That's clear.
That's right.
That happened everywhere. And then is destabilization, which is going on right now. and then we go into a crisis, and then these bad guys win. How do you read it, Michael? What's really going on? I mean, how's this going to work out? Who's going
It's
to
1
win?
in the morning here, so I'm gonna have some coffee because I'm fasting, and so, excuse me for my coffee. And but Yuri Bezmenov, that guy was brilliant. I've watched his video numerous times, like half a dozen, because he just knew his business. He studied Hindi. He was down in India, and he clearly was not just a student of this. He was an action arm. And so he knew what was coming. And as have many. I mean, when you read about information war through space and time, it's like nothing has changed. I mean, you can read books. I love old books. I spend a lot of time at antique bookstores because I like to read things that are safely removed from our period, so it doesn't have any of our politics polluted in there. And then, like, I've got these 3 books from Benjamin Franklin here that I picked up 1806. I picked them up in a Tokyo bookstore. Actually, he died in 1790, but there is letters and whatnot. And he's talking about the dangers of the smallpox inoculation. And he's talking about that in like the 1770s. And I found another book from 1889. I read the book. It was by a British doctor, and he's talking about the dangers of smallpox inoculation. And he goes through and all the statistics. It could have been written this morning, but the information wars are the same. By the time we were born, by the time our grandparents were born, this was already a very high art, right? So we're basically born in Plato's cave, you know? And so we're born in the matrix, and it takes years of study, and only a few people seem to be able to find the zipper to the IMAX and go out, right? But even then, I think you sometimes find yourself in a concentric IMAX, you know? You leave one and you're like, wait, I'm out of that one, but I'm in another one. And, you know, but you know, and every once in a while you see, I think, authentic stars, you know, but the information wars are brought to such a high level of art that the people who are waging these wars can just write "BB better" on their signs and just flaunt it like you won't see it. I'll throw a rattlesnake in your lap and you won't see it because you'll just think it's nothing, you know.
No, we're completely on the same page, I think, philosophically, and I think in almost every other way. Why do you think this is going to end? Right now, the bad guys have got the momentum.
I returned to the United States in August 2020. I've spent most of my time overseas in other countries, but I returned in 2020 because I could clearly see we're going into civil war. And war, I've done a lot of war, right? And whether it's Iraq, Afghanistan, Nepal, 2 coups in Thailand, just a lot, right? And I've studied it a lot as well. So there's the component of going there, and then there's the component of it's important to see numerous, because you know how it is. If you meet one person, you think that's how people are. But you start meeting a lot of people, you're like, no, people are something else. It's the same with wars, right? It's important to go to numerous wars and compare and contrast, and then spend a lot of time in books and with people who spend a lot of time in books, because you have to discuss things and start figuring things out. But what do I think? United States is clearly going into civil war. That's not the only kind of war, because we clearly are going into civil war. That's why I returned in August of 2020. But it's not the only war we're going into. Like, Israel could go into civil war right now, but at the same time, they've got the wolves at the door, right? And likewise, when I was in the Iraq war, I was the first one calling the Iraq war in 2005, in about maybe February or so, something like that. I started publishing that Iraq was in a civil war. That was very controversial, but it was obviously in a civil war, but not all of Iraq. So people that had a vested interest in saying it's not in a civil war, because the Bush administration did not want to say it was a civil war. They thought Americans would lose the will to be there. But as somebody who was physically there, I'm like, not all of Iraq was in a civil war. There were components like Baghdad area, Diyala province, and some other areas. In other areas like Anbar and Basra, there was no civil war, right? So the people that were trying to defend it would say, well, there's no civil war in Anbar. And I'm like, that's true, but it's incredibly deadly. That's where Fallujah is, right? But the bottom line is, you have to call things by what they really are. Words are the atomic structures of truth and lies. You can't make water out of lithium and oxygen. It takes 2 hydrogen and 1 oxygen, and that's your water, right? And two hydrogen and two oxygen is hydrogen peroxide. It has to be right. Like I see people keep talking about illegal immigration. I'm like, they are not illegal immigrants. This is an invasion. This is a war. You're in a state of war. We're being hit with these jabs. We're being hit economically. We're being hit with weaponized migration. It's an invasion. We're being hit with every sort of weapon in the book. Information war is off the charts, right? And so we have to call things by what they are. So going back to Iraq, so for about about a year and a half or so, I was saying Iraq is in a civil war. Now, it wasn't the only war going on. There was also an insurgency. And so a lot of people don't realize the difference. But imagine if you're an oncologist and you will never deliver the news that somebody has cancer because it'll make them upset. It'll make their family upset. It'll make the president upset if he has cancer. Well, then he's going to die because I know you don't want to hear you have cancer. So you're okay. I mean, and so, but you have to treat a civil war differently than you will treat other components of the war, right? We needed to separate the Sunni from the Shia in certain parts of Iraq. And finally we did. Finally, in about mid 2006, some of the people, I think maybe NBC was one of the first, they're like, we're going to officially say it's a civil war. I'm like, okay, but we've lost a year and a half when we could have been tamping this down. And it was a major component of the war. And we finally did tamp it down, but only after, anyway. So, but the bottom line is—
wouldn't going back, looking at Iraq, wouldn't anything that we do be a temporary solution? Because it's really not a real country. It's at least three separate countries, and it ought to be broken up into three separate countries. Otherwise, you're always going to have civil wars, which are two or more groups trying to take over the same government.
Actually, most of the countries I go to, which is almost 100, could be described like that. India, Nepal, Afghanistan. Afghanistan really is just an area that's not another country. So, when you go to Afghanistan, it's like a jungle. I actually liked Afghans. I spent 2 years there, right? I spent 2 years in Iraq and 2 in Afghanistan. And they're both very fractious. One time, I spent about a year in India. And at one point I was in Hong Kong heading back to India, and everybody at the airport in that certain waiting area to get on the aircraft next to the gate, they were all Indians. And I said, I've been thinking a lot. I've been traveling around your country, India. And I was talking with another giant Indian. And I said, he was an older man. And I said, I can't figure out how you keep India together. I mean, like, you've got all the components for like massive, things not going right. And other people heard me saying that to him. And one man stood up, and it was an older man too. He said, what did he say? He said something like, nobody runs India, not even God. Only India runs India. It's one of those Indian answers. But I love talking with Indians. But the bottom line is, I still don't know how they keep India together. I'm going to go back there and try to crack that code again. But again, India is just a mini. I mean, what is there? 17 languages on their money or something like that.
It's just a good thing. It's just a good thing that they have English, which is one of the things that bind them together.
The British were helpful with that. For all the things that everybody said, the Indians are honest about the British. The Indians will be like, they did this, they did that. But they helped us with the railways. They gave us English, and they're balanced in their view they're honest in their view of the British. And India and Nepal's the same way. I mean, you can walk because I've trekked around Nepal quite a lot. I've walked up to Mount Everest a couple of times, just to the bottom, Annapurna several times, and just all over the place. And you leave one village and you walk a few hours and you're in another village, and they're speaking a different language. Not on the Everest side. Those are mostly monoculture there. But when you get over to the other side, the western side, like the Annapurna area, it's like everywhere, village after village, they can be wearing different clothing and speaking different dialects. And when the Maoists came in there, I was out there during the Maoist war. I was just trekking around, but what I was really doing was trekking around, having fun. But I was also studying that war. But I never said that at the time. That's a war that I never wrote anything about, actually. But I spent a year out there. And what the Maoists were doing is what is being done here now, getting everybody to speak their own dialect. They're doing that in Okinawa. They're trying to get the old Okinawans they're trying to get people to speak old Okinawan dialect. I think, what was there, 7 old dialects, major dialects here, something like that in the Ryukyu Kingdom. And so, but the bottom line is they do this atomization of culture, split men from women, adults from children, split families by language groups. Now, like in Nepal, they started getting schools to teach in their native tongue. It's just divide and conquer. And so likewise, I mean, going back to Iraq, you mentioned that. Yeah, you go around Iraq. I mean, there's and actually a lot of people think it breaks down between Sunni and Shia and Kurds. And there are those force fields, but there's also something more intense, far more intense. And I've spent a lot of time asking Iraqis about this, and that's the tribal structures. So, for instance, when you see Al-Jabari tribe is the biggest tribe in Iraq, right? And there's a lot of Al-Jabari in the Al-Jabari tribe who are Sunni. That's the predominant is Sunni, but a lot are Shia. And when you ask them, and I did all the time, I said, "Oh, you're Al-Jabari." And I would ask them, what do you think about, I'd ask the same questions over and over. What do you think about Shia? And they're like, oh, they're enemies and da-da-da-da. But, we used to get along under Saddam and this sort of thing. And I said, what about, and they're killing each other, civil war. And I said, what do you think about Shia who are Al-Jabari? And they're like, wow, well, that's different. I mean, yeah, they're Shia, but that's my tribe. And that's what the Shia would say too. They're like, well, Sunni, they're doing this, that, and the other. But the Al-Jabari, it's tribal. Your base structure there is tribal. That's like when I go to so many of these countries, people will say, you need to study Islam to understand them. I'm like, no, you don't understand. You got to really dig down in the anthropological mud here. Like when you're going to understand how Pashtun people react, right? And I spent a lot of time with Pashtun people and Uzbek people and Tajiks and Hazars and Baluch and all that over in Afghanistan. It's not the religion that you have to really look at. It's the substrate culture, right? When you look at the Pashtun, if you ask their substrate firmware for their culture, it's what's called Pashtunwali, right? It's like the Pashtun way. And when you ask the Pashtuns, and I've done this many times, what's more important to you, Pashtunwali or Islam? They always say Pashtunwali. They're like, Islam is very important, but we are Pashtun first, then we became Muslims. But actually, a lot of the Pashtun think they're a lost tribe of Israel, and Kurds are the same, by the way. But interestingly, though, so I was up in Ireland a couple of years ago, and I had a taxi driver. He's Nigerian. I'm doing the taxi driver question time, and I said, "Oh, you're from Nigeria?" And I said, "What tribe are you, Igbo or what?" And he said, "Oh yeah, Igbo." And I asked him the same questions I asked different groups or in different parts of the world. I said, when Nigerians come to Ireland, and there was a lot there, and up in northern Canada too, I said, what do you do? Do you go look for other Africans or other Nigerians or other Igbo people? And he's like, Igbo, of course. And his English was quite good. He's like, we find our tribes, which I knew that would be the answer, but I'm still going to continue to ask for, you know what I mean? You got to continue to just confirm these things. But what I'm getting to is these people that are coming into these countries like Ireland, United States, they're not coming in as individuals. We in the Western world, we tend to look at like Irish who left during the Great Famine from 1845 to 54. They'll argue about when it ended, but whatever. So roughly that time frame, they typically came over as individuals and that sort of thing, or they may have come over in different ways, but typically they're sort of individuals, right? But when you see these tribal structures, which the Scottish obviously can have claned up, right? But they like the Pashtun people coming over, the Baluch people and the Tajiks and all that, they're not going to go find other Afghans. Now they will. I mean, some of my Afghan friends in California, they find other Afghans, but they typically pile up with their tribe, right? And so they're coming over as they've got established ways of being. They've got their tribal firmware. They've got in-house structure. They know how to fight as a unit already, right? Because it's in their firmware. I mean, these are high testosterone people that were born in war and know how to do war, and they're coming over as tribal structures, whether that be from Somalia or Nigeria or Pakistan, or in many, not all are coming over as tribal structures, but many are, right? And so that's one of the things that a lot of Americans don't get. These Somalis, they've got in-house security. You're not going to penetrate them, generally speaking, right? You're not going to penetrate the Pashtun people. They are going to be within their almost hermetic systems, right? And so the Irish now, it's believed that about 1/3 of the people in Ireland now are recent invaders, right? And a friend,
the number is that
over there,
large, Michael. One third of Ireland is, and I'm not talking about, visiting Poles and Lithuanians that were there for a job. We're talking about people from really alien cultures like the Nigerians.
That's what they're saying. Now, I do not know how to audit that. I did go over there and look myself 2 years ago, and it does pass the sniff test, but I don't know a way to reliably audit that. I've a friend of mine over in Ireland now. He's already mapped the camps before I published those camps. He's updating it right now. And you look at the maps of these camps all over Ireland and around Dublin. These things are strategically placed to control Dublin, as an example. You can see that right along when you look at that through a military eye, you're like, that's military disposition of their migrants, the invaders. Ireland, you can easily genocide. If it is 1/3, they are definitely mostly military age males. And keep in mind, most of the Irish are not military age males. It's elderly people, it's women, it's children, it's people that couldn't fight, even if they're military age males. But you've got these high testosterone people coming in from Nigeria, Somalia, Afghanistan, and they're coming over as tribal structures, right? And so that's
this doesn't sound like it could possibly have a happy ending.
I don't see Ireland coming out with any. I talked with an Irish guy 2 days ago. He's in Colombia. He's been warning about this for years. And now he said, that's it. I'm ejecting. I went to Colombia. So when I talked with him for a couple of hours, he's in Colombia. And I said, the Irish should be paying attention to you because you've been warning them for 15 years or so. And now you have ejected to Colombia. And you were clearly right of what was unfolding. And I think it's very obvious that a genocide will happen in Ireland. And of course, we don't know these things until they come to pass. But it's clear that that's what they're setting the table for, because it's all about conditions, setting conditions. It's not about sparks. People are asking me all the time about sparks, but that's amateurville. It's about conditions, setting conditions that, if you got a dry forest, any spark will do, right? And in the Darien Gap, where I spend so much time in that jungle, you could have a 747 filled with gas crash out there in the rainy season, and it's just going to burn a smoking hole. It's not going to burn the jungle down because there's no conditions for it. But California, where they don't clear the underbrush for years and that sort of thing, and then they have a drought and it burns down a town, right? And so that's what they're doing. The globalists are setting conditions to, for instance, take Netherlands and Germany, and Luxembourg's gone, Ireland's gone, Canada's gone, and Americans are not standing up. They keep saying, don't mess with Texas. I spend a lot of time in Texas. When I leave here, I'll punch back to Texas. And they're saying, don't mess with Texas, but they're messing with Texas, and the border does not exist. I've been across the entire U.S. border from SpaceX at Boca Chica, where the Rio Grande dumps into the Gulf, and SpaceX is right on the Mexican border. I mean, it's like launching dangerously close to people on the Mexican beaches. It's really wild. And I've been all the way to San Diego, and all on the American side and a lot on the Mexican side. That border does not exist. I mean, it's just a line on the paper. And Border Patrol are helping them come in. It's the same over in Ireland, right? It's the same across Europe. When I was down in Morocco, I'm watching the Moroccans weaponize our good friends, the Moroccans. Actually, they were the first country to recognize the United States. And I always say thank you to Moroccans. And they're like, no, Americans, none of them know that. And I'm like, well, I'd like to thank you for being the first to recognize the United States after we got our independence. I mean, it was for economic reasons, but they're actually quite proud of that, by the way. But I was down in Morocco, and I like the people there, but they're weaponizing the aliens against Spain. And there's two Spanish cities in Morocco, right? Ceuta and Melilla, right? And yeah. So they've got big walls around them. So I went to the outside wall of Ceuta. I didn't go to Melilla. And there was aliens living up on the mountainside in the rocks and stuff. I went up there and talked with them at nighttime, and they're like, yeah, we're just waiting till we get enough numbers again. And then as soon as you can get into Ceuta or Melilla, you're in the EU, right?
Yeah.
So there's different ways to get inside the EU, but this weaponized migration is an old, and that's how I recognized that something was about to kick off with Russia and Ukraine, was when we were in Morocco and we realized that Frontex, which is the like EU border patrol, which is essentially useless, but Frontex was in their headquarters is in Warsaw. And Frontex told Chuck Holton and me, he's a war correspondent friend, we were in Morocco together, and they said that, hey, Belarus is pushing migrants into Poland and Lithuania. So I said, Lithuania, I lived 2 years in Poland, but I said, So I called up a senior military officer in the Lithuanian army because I was with them in Afghanistan. And so he said, yeah, we were just about to invite you up here. I said, I can be in Vilnius tomorrow. So we flew up to Vilnius. I stayed there for 5 weeks and they gave me full access to the camps, right? And so I was going in these various camps in Lithuania.
Who were in those camps in Lithuania?
Oh, there were Chechens. And I said, Chechens. Uh-oh, here we go with those Chechens again. I said, Chechens. There was a lot of Kurds. There were a lot of Yazidis. Of course, Yazidis and Kurds sometimes argue if they're Yazidis. It doesn't matter. There were a lot of Kenyans, and they're from many countries. It was basically almost what I see coming through the Darien Gap. And I said, Chechens. I said, how do you store your Chechens? Because Chechens are a special group, right? And I said something like, what's the Chechen critical mass? And they're like 6. We can't keep more than 6 Chechens together because then they become super Chechen. They reach critical mass. They go super Chechen and they become total gangsters. They're super polite when you got like 5 to 6. They meet a phase transformation at 7 to 10, 20. It's Gangsterville. And so I said, oh, can you take me to your Chechens? They took me to them. And they all spoke German fluently, and the Chechens, and I speak German. And so I was talking with them, and they were going back to Germany. Actually, they had already been there, and they were very polite because there was only 6 of them, and I'm just like, man, these guys, eye of the tiger, and these guys in the West doesn't realize. Keep in mind, again, I want to repeat, I've spent most of my life overseas in almost 100 countries. I've been with a lot of cultures, right? And sometimes I'm the only white man I see for a month or 2 at a time, right? And so I'm out seeing a lot of things, and I've learned that some fish don't mix well in the same aquarium, and they are going to simply fight. Somebody told me a couple of days ago, I mentioned that to him, and he said, yeah, I had all these nice fish and the little things that you get in the store. He said, and I caught a catfish and I put it in the aquarium with him, and I came back the next day and all my fish were gone. I'm like, well, you've learned the lesson of fish. It's like, that's why they have those fish charts. And Chechens, if you had a fish chart for your freshwater or saltwater aquarium, Filipinos would be like green, 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 green. They get along with everybody except for other Filipinos. They would be amber. And then they're green, green, green. They get along with everybody except Filipinos, which they get along with too. But Chechens are like red, 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 amber with other Chechens and red. I mean, they just don't mix, right? They're Chechens, and they're very serious men, and they fight, and they go full gangster. And a lot of people in the West, they're still naive to. I read a book some years ago, maybe 5 years ago, on island biogeography, island biodiversity, right? And the book is about how different islands have different, basically, life forms, and many of the islands, they have very naive populations on there, right? Like the dodo bird or whatever. And then you show up and you've got some rat on your boat and goes down the line, and then it eats all their eggs and it's gone. Or the dodo birds don't walk away from you, and these sorts of things. And that's the way, for instance, the Swedish were. If we treat them well, they'll treat us well. I'm like, you don't know what you're dealing with. You're petting a crocodile. You know what I mean? They are going to eat you for sure. And that's what's happening now, right? And that's what Europe is learning the lesson. They've been, I just finished, not really reading, but I just finished studying this book a few days ago. It's the Machiavellians. It's actually a derivative, Niccolo Machiavellian's The Prince. But this one took a long time to study. It's a derivative of that. And he talks about oligarchical structures. That's why I was reading it. But then I just went back and read The Prince again over the last couple of days, which is a brilliant book. If you read The Prince when you're younger, it's kings and queens and okay, whatever. Why does everybody say this book's so great? But when you read it when you're older, after you've done a lot of this stuff, you're like, that dude is brilliant. You know what I mean? And anyway, what I'm getting to is he mentions Niccolo Machiavelli in his book, The Prince. He talks about how cultures who have, they have this almost curse of, he didn't use the word curse, but these long periods of peace, and the men become effeminate, right? He mentioned this several times actually in The Prince. So if anybody's got The Prince, you can look through and search effeminate. You'll see he keeps mentioning that. And that's what's happened here in Japan. Part of that's from the War Guilt Information Program, which we launched after World War II. We did the same to the Germans, and now it's been used on us, right? Now it's cool to be effeminate, you know what I mean? Which is actually making you ripe for destruction. And the same happened with the Swedes, of course, but theirs was just the bane of, you would think it's a blessing to live in these long periods of peace, but actually you're surrounded by predators, right? And these people are living in war, and now they see you're basically wearing pork chops around your neck. I tell the Panamanians the same thing. I go down, I spent 6 months or so in Panama since Biden was installed. And I've told top members of that government numerous times, they're going to come for you. You've got, and I say they, I mean CCP are clearly going to come for that canal. And I think what they're going to do is they're going to use Colombia, because the canal opened in 1914. We built the canal. It was our canal, and the globalists gave it away, and Carter. And now when we built the canal back at that time, Panama was part of Colombia. So we staged a sort of insurrection and break off. So then we created Panama, right? And when Colombia came to say no, we sent the U.S. Navy down there and blocked them, right? Roosevelt. And so we created a country so that we could have that canal. Now, simmering in the background, like when I've gone to Colombia and asked them these things, are like, oh yeah, Panama is ours, and one day we'll get it back again. And so they don't say it publicly. I haven't seen any of their top leaders say it, but I trust my senses at this point. It's coming. I think what's going to happen, that's why I go to Darien Gap a lot, not just to track the invasions, but I go there I thought they're going to build a road to Colombia, right? And so less than a year ago, maybe it was earlier this year, I found they are actually building that road now. So at that point, I brought Ann Vandersteel, and I brought Brett Weinstein and Dr. Chris Martinson, Laura Loomer. I brought quite a few people. I brought Epoch Times. I brought all these people down. I said, look at this. They're connecting an artery to South America right here. This is it. And they kept this secret. And the only reason I know about it is because every few months I go down there looking for mud tracks on the road, because I'm looking for anybody coming off the road that might be working. I found some mud tracks, followed it back, bingo. And it's a huge bridge. They're building another one way back, and they're building it. Now, this is a road that can be used to invade us, obviously, but because if you can get to South America, then you get through Darien, and that's it. And then it's just buses to the United States, which what they do every day, but they just walk through. And but now that also is setting conditions for Colombia to start salami slicing Panama. So you know how this will go. They'll be like, well, we'll take this little section. But you know how the salami slicing goes, right? I mean, you're a very learned man. So actually, I should be quiet and let you talk, sir. But you gave me the oxygen, and I took it. But
oh, this is fantastic. Listen, people are here to hear you talk, Michael. They hear us talk all the time. This is fantastic. Listening to you debrief on this type of thing. How often I got to ask you, how often do you do somebody else's podcast these days?
I do quite a lot, actually. I was on the bigger ones I was on recently were more like Tucker Carlson and Sean Wright. A lot. I mean, I've done a lot, actually. But because I don't usually broadcast. I have done a few in recent days. I did a few short videos simply because I got the camera set up. And I'm sitting here studying for a month. And so it's easy for me to flick. Usually I'm out actually talking with scientists or military people and talking with farmers. I love to talk with farmers. And because you learn a lot of ground truth from farmers. And one thing I've noticed, by the way, with farmers, in every country I go to, I get along with the farmers, every single one. I mean, I was out with Taliban farmers at one point. I'm like, why are we at war with these guys? I like them. You know what I mean? They're just farmers. They want to tell me about the aphids on their plants and the water and the price of corn. And you know what I mean? I got this new cow or something. You know what I mean? And they're just like people that you just easily get along with. And they're down to earth. They don't think they know that their tears cannot water their corn. Although one night I say that with the reason we used to intercept their radios a lot, right? When I was with the British and American military, and we'd intercept their walkie-talkies, right? Their PTTs. And at nighttime, the Taliban would be out there singing to each other like it's almost an AM radio station. They'd be like, put Muhammad on. They're all Muhammad. Put Muhammad on and tell him to sing "My Tears Water the Corn" or stuff like that. And they would be singing in Pashtun, and it's just hilarious. And at one point, I'm like, why are we fighting these guys? These guys could be doing a stage act in America. I mean, they're absolutely hilarious. But I was out with this one farmer one time. I was in Helmand province, and I was not with soldiers. I went all over the place. Of the 2 years I spent in Afghanistan, 1 year I was not with any forces at all. I was just out there with me and Afghans a lot. And our military was tracking my phone. Like when I would see patrols, I stopped some Marines, or they were stopped, and I stopped to see these Marines, and they're like, hey, Michael, we knew you were here. Let's take a photo. We're going to send it to command right now. And they're like, you're crazy. What are you doing running around here alone with Afghans? I'm like, listen, let me tell you how many times I've been shot at with them. 0. But when I'm with you, I get shot at. We get blown up. The vehicle's rolled over on fire. Right. I only get shot at with them. I have never been shot at when I'm alone. Not even one time. It's like I go out with you, we get shot at 5 times in one day. And if the tribe welcomes you in, the most dangerous thing out here is they're driving. I mean, which is pretty dangerous. But other than that, like once the tribal leader, because under Pakhtunwali, the Pashtun way, if they invite you in, I've forgotten how to pronounce it. It's like Namaskar. Anyway, but once they invite you in, they will guard you with their life. They will not. That's right. And that's what I'm saying. You have to understand, you have to study the substrate culture, not the religion. Right. And let me actually just go for a minute down that train. I keep telling people that because they keep talking about Islam versus, I'm like, that's important, but there's another stronger current are the cultures. Like for instance, you're not going to understand Mexicans and Polish and Italians and Catholic Japanese by studying Catholicism, because Catholic Japanese and Catholic Mexicans and Catholic Polish and Catholic Italians and Catholic Vietnamese are all very, very different. You know what I mean? You have to study that culture, right? That's the wood under the paint, right? And so people get confused by that. I mean, Islam and Christianity and Judaism, of course, are and Hinduism and so many other major religions, and all religions are very important to study. But that substrate culture is where you really get the strong ocean currents. But I'm sorry, you were asking a question, I think, and
there's one I wanted to ask you real quick. It's just you said Ireland's all over, Netherlands are all over, talking about the migration issues there. Canada is all over. Well, the United States has had huge amounts of this migrant invasion, and I know you paid a lot of attention to that. Is the U.S. over already because of what's the fuse has been? Has it been lit because of the migration at this point, or is there a way out?
There's a way out, but it's not anything that I can say and get out with my skin. I think people can clearly see that you're not going to. I was at the 2020 elections, and obviously those were, seriously. Yeah. And then I came back, I was somewhere in Asia, and they were doing the midterms. And I'm like, out of all the counties in America, which one would I go to that I think it's just going to be a naked steal? So I went to Maricopa, right? So I was in Maricopa for the elections. I went to 2 polling sites, and they that the machines didn't work, and they were telling people to go to other polling sites where the machines didn't work, right? And so they ran out the clock, and it was clear steal, right? Why would anybody think that this is going to work or the court systems are going to work, right? You're going to just vote a lot harder this time. I'm really going to hit that button hard this time. We have allowed ourselves to be taken, mostly without force. And there is no border. We have millions coming in per year, but nobody knows how. I think I can safely say millions just because I see it myself. I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, I've been up on the Canadian border. You go to the Bahamas, they're flying in 24/7, and just watching across the border. You go down to Arizona or California.
Has it diminished? Has the flow of migrants diminished at all? Do they come in sine waves, or is it kind of a steady flow of what is it, 100,000 a month?
Behavior has this magical way of going in sine waves, doesn't it? Now, in different information war actually often does go in sine waves, but as does ocean storms. But and so to that end, when you look at Darien Gap, there are cyclical annual cycles due to the rains, right? And whatever may affect their countries of origin, but the countries of origin change and their routes are changing, like capillaries, or like in 3 years ago, it was mostly Cubans and Haitians. But now the Cubans and Haitians, although they still come through in small numbers, they mostly go to Nicaragua first, or they go other ways, like Nicaragua. And some actually go through Bahamas. Again, when I was up in Bahamas some months ago, one of the intel guys I was talking with there, he's like, Americans don't realize we are America's other border. And this is very important for drugs. This is like, we got this Chinese port they're building. Look at the embassy they're building, right? And so they're coming through so many routes. And one thing, by the way, that's not in the news at all, to my knowledge, is, well, first of all, the thing I told you about Colombia. I think they're going to go for Panama at some point, and they'll be backed by the CCP. I haven't seen that in any analysis anywhere, but that's just, I can smell it in the air. And that another is, I think, I do not know, but just based on tea leaves and little pieces of snippets of information, I think they're going to start using boats from Nicoclí in Colombia, which I've been to. In Nicoclí in Colombia, that's where all the aliens who are coming through South America, they meet at Nicoclí. They get on sort of small boats and they go to a place called Cartagena, and that's where they go into the Darien Gap, right? And so, and most of them walk it. A few of them take small boats around to these Kuna Indian places, which I've done quite a lot. So I'm very familiar with the dynamics there and the geography and the geometry of the situation as well, and the human terrain. And what I'm getting to is, I think what's going to happen is they're going to start taking larger boats, and they're going to totally bypass the Darien Gap, and they're going to do it Camp of the Saints style. This is the book that I think a lot of people have heard of, which is hard to get hold of. But I think they're going to start doing it that way, and I think they're going to do this in Colombia. And of course, they could do it from Haiti as well, but I think they're going to start doing it from Colombia. I do not know. I don't have hard information. It's a scent in the room, and I've gotten some little tidbits of information. I think they're going to start that. I don't know when, but I would think it would be sooner than later. Now, the United States Southcom, which is Southern Command, are fully involved in helping with this. And by the way, all these NGO headquarters are at Ciudad de Saber in Panama City, which is the old Fort Clayton. When I'm there, I often stay at the Holiday Inn right next to IOM headquarters. IOM is the UN IOM, International Organization for Migration. That is the main engine of the invasions. It's IOM. If you're in airports, you can see their blue or white bags. Actually, they seem to have fewer of those bags now because we've been calling them out so much. But I think you can probably still see some. But IOM, like if you go to Netherlands, you go to the Schiphol Airport, you go to Terminal 3 and go through those rotating doors, look to your left, there's an IOM ticket office where they're helping people that get it to Schiphol from, whether they come from China or whatever, they're helping them get to places like Quito, Ecuador. They're helping them get.
What percentage of the people that come across the various borders into the U.S. penniless? What percentage of them get credit cards or whatever from these organizations or the U.S. government or whoever gives them money
I think penniless is not a lot, actually. I like I mean, the Chinese pay 20 to 30,000 bucks to get through. That's what they all tell me. It'll be like, and a lot of the others, and the Afghans too. Afghans pay similarly. Afghans got some money. People think like Afghans are poor. I'm like, again, that's a supposition, which is untrue.
They got more money than the average American. It sounds like.
Oh yeah,
the American, they say
cash.
Can't get together $500 for a weekend.
You know what? I found in this camp of the saints, I think I got it marked right here on this. Yeah, here it is. Wait, yeah, here it is. I got it. I got the page marked where it's talking about how much Chinese are paying to get in. But this is Camp of the Saints, and this is a publisher's note from a re-edition. And he's talking about how the Chinese pay what, like 20 or 30? Yeah, 20. Here it is. It says they're talking about Chinese who come up in boats in New York. And this is 1993, right? 1993. He says here on Sunday, June 16th, 1993 at 2 a.m., the freighter Golden Venture ran aground off Rockaway Peninsula Beach in New York City. I need my glasses. The ship held a cargo of over 300 illegal aliens from the Chinese province of Fujian. A lot of them are from Fujian. I'm always asking if you're from Fujian. And most were young men, about 20 were women. Okay, now let's skip down one paragraph. The passengers mortgaged their futures by promising to pay $20,000 to $35,000 apiece to professional smugglers. So that's 1993 he's talking about. That's the same price they pay now, 20 to 30,000 bucks. And now these debit cards are quite real. I got a whole bag of them because they throw them down on the ground when they cut a lot of them, or they just lose them. And I got all kinds of,
who are they issued by, Mike?
I can send you photos of them later. UN. Yeah, UN. I can send you
UN.
Photos. I mean, I've got photos of, but I took them up to some congressmen wanted to talk and went up there and I laid a whole long table out with all these things about, I don't know, probably a dozen congressmen. And I was like, I don't even know why I'm here. What good is it going to do? I mean, I did. I mean, because it's like going to vote when you know that it probably doesn't matter, but you're going to do it anyway, just in case. And actually, I took one of the Beret leaders up. Actually, the Center for Immigration Studies paid for it. Todd Binsman and his group, but I introduced them to this Beret Indian leader named Francisco Agape. Beret Indians are the main. There's two major groups of Indians in the Darien Gap, Beret and Kuna, right? And Francisco Agape is the mayor of about 26. I think it's 29 now. I think they added 3 more villages. He's the mayor of those villages. He's in Beret. He went to school up in Oregon, so he speaks English fluently. And then he went back to dangerous Darien because he's like, I want to go back with my people. I'm like, most people would want to go to Oregon. He goes, no, I am in Beret. And so he's back there now. And so we brought him up to Washington, D.C., and he's talking with the congressmen. And I was with him in numerous separate offices for private talks with congressmen. And he's telling them what this is doing to his people. It's destroying his people. All the money that his young men are getting from these aliens coming through, he's got his young men, they're doing drugs. They don't want to learn how to farm. He messages me pretty often, but one time he's like, and when I go to Darien Gap, I often go with him. He's like, some of my young men are drinking alcohol now, and they've actually hit their wives. They hit their wives, and they put them they've got these stockades, like old school, man. They put your ankles in the stockades. They don't put your hand and head, but they put your ankles. I've been in probably, I don't know, 25 or 30 of their villages, right? Every village has got the stockades. If you're a bad boy, they'll put you in there for a couple hours in the sun and like shame you. They don't have jails, of course. I haven't been to any village in the world that has jails, whether it's the Karen people in Burma or whatever. They're always like, oh, and one there told me too, he's like, somebody got drunk and beat his wife. We tied him to a pole. He had to stay there all night. It's like total shame to the village, right? But these structures are being eroded down in the Darien Gap now due to the money. And so they've been raping the women coming through. And he's like, some of my young men are the ones out doing these rapes and murders in the forest. They get in firefights. The Center Front, which is like the Panamanian Border Patrol, they kill them. I mean, on a regular basis. Last time I was down there, I was having dinner at one of the restaurants in Darien, And the guy serving me, I knew his cousin just got killed in a firefight, young cousin, because he had been out raping women. So, I mean, these are almost, and the forest is being denuded, these beautiful, unbelievably incredible jungles, these incredible trees. The Chinese are down there just cutting it down, cutting it down. And they're salami slicing right through that jungle. And I tell Francisco and the rest, I'm like, you realize when that jungle's gone, Panamanians will buy your stuff. You're going to be slow. And he's like, I know. But some of my people, they're fighting among each other. They want the money. The trees aren't worth anything. I mean, they're paying like $30 and $40 for a lot of those trees. And the super expensive trees, more like I think it's the Coca-Cola tree. They can get thousands for those trees, but there's not many of those. They're basically cutting down the forest at like 30 or 40 bucks a tree. You got these giant trees coming on the trucks coming up to Panama, where they get on they put them on ships and they take them off to places like China, right? And they're just raping the forest. So there's so many things happening there. And all these green people, they don't say a word, because the green people obviously are just information warriors. They're wind up potatoes like AOC, right?
No, that's fascinating. And of course, the tree situation, that'll all sort out in terms of geological time, but only geological time.
Yeah.
In the here and now, what's your solution? This is a big problem with millions of people crossing the border. And I would think that the ultimate solution is to change American culture so that they're not such wimpy namby-pambies and don't let foreign people invade their space. But what's your solution? Because you're not going to change the culture anytime soon. What's your solution to solving this problem, at least short term?
Actually, that's a conundrum. I mean, you're getting into a Gordian knot here. You need to change the culture. It's like the crowd from 1895. You know what I mean? That substrate firmware. Of course, he didn't use the word firmware in 1895, but I mean, these cultures that are coming through that are warlike, the most persistent thing among an intact culture is that cultural firmware, right? It doesn't change readily. It doesn't change quickly, right? Unless you divide people up and water them down. Otherwise, you end up with what I call anthro-insula, because there's no other, I couldn't find a word for it. I asked every anthropologist in the world, I think, what's a word for cultures who form these little islands, little oil spots that I see all over the world. So finally, I just made up my own word, human islands, anthro-insula. That firmware in these anthro-insulas doesn't change, right? It just stays. It'll be an old dialect, eating old recipes, telling old stories, and doing old things, right? And so what I'm getting to is, over years, we have been targeted by the same sorts of information we targeted Japanese with, the War Guilt Information Program, or the Germans and others. It's been used against us, and it's watered down our males. Most of the wars have been foreign. Most of the people, obviously, in our lifetime haven't actually experienced the war unless they're an actual foreigner, right? Or they were in the military. And so we have gone what Niccolo Machiavelli would say, a lot of the men have become effeminate. They just don't have that warrior spirit. They say they wear the big hat and they wear the boots and they say, don't mess with Texas. I'm like, brother, that border is wide open, right? You see that guy, Joe Rogan, as an example. I've attacked him many times. I was on with Alex Jones. I went on his show, and Alex says he's known Joe Rogan 26 years and best friends and all that. And we were live on his show. And Alex had told me this numerous times. He's like, I can get you on the Joe Rogan show. I probably can't. I'll introduce you to him. I go to dinner with him all the time. And he asked me live on his show, do you want to go on Joe Rogan? I'm probably the only person on planet Earth who just like flatly said no, right? And I did it live. And I said no. And you'd have to find the episode. But I was just like, I'm not going on Joe Rogan. Listen, this guy is Mr. Super MMA. He's a stud. And yet he's smoking dope and getting drunk on his show in front of millions of young people. He is a clear operator, right? He's clearly, now a lot of people got upset. They're like, you should have used that opportunity to I get it. I know the math. I totally get it. And I know that argument intricately, right? And I decided to go the way I did for reasons, right? And I think it was the right reason. Maybe it wasn't. I do not know, but I think it was. And I said, no, I'm not going on. And why? I'm watching these Chinese come across the Darien Gap. I'm watching them. They go to places like Maine. They are growing huge amounts of dope in Maine. And this isn't the dope that people were smoking in the 60s, right? And this isn't about my freedom. Everybody's always, whenever you bring this up, they're like, oh, you're just one of those whatever they were supposed to be. And I'm like, no, no, no. I actually go to wars, and I know how people like you get your heads chopped off, because I deal with these people in their countries of origin. And when they come to you, they will kill you, right? And they're not going to be like, oh, your freedom, go ahead. No, they're going to kill you, and they're going to take your house, right? And they'll take your women, right? This is no joke. This is real war, right? So you got the Chinese growing dope in Maine and Oklahoma and Oregon and California, Washington State. They're growing dope everywhere. Thousands of Americans are dying per week, as we're told, by fentanyl. I've seen it all over. I've been all over the United States since I got back in August 2020. I've been in most of the states since then, really seeing this stuff. And it's just unbelievable. I mean, I spend most of my time overseas. So when I come back to the United States, I'm like, my people are drugged up. I mean, because I'm usually around people that don't do drugs, right? I'm around people that are actually alert, you know what I mean? And I get back to the United States and I see people irritable. I see them depressed, and I'm like, and so many people.
That's a cultural, that's a real cultural problem we have in the US, and it's going to take a while to turn that around.
So that's going back to Rogan and others. And I said, listen, when you're brainwashing people, you want to get them drunk. You want to get them high. Soma, 1984, right? You want to get them in a state of mind, isolated, COVID, isolated. You can drink all the alcohol you want. You can do all that. Makes you very suggestible, right? And they, by the way, these real authoritarian takeovers, they use the sinusoidal pattern, right? They'll come get you with a high degree of pressure, and just when you're about to break and overthrow the government or something, they'll decrease and give you relaxation. And you're like, yeah, we got through that. And then, like a storm at sea, it comes back and the wave's a little bit higher this time, and then it goes back down. And that's when the sailors need to fix their ropes and that sort of thing. Matt Bracken, SEAL officer, and I were talking about that the other night. I don't know if you know Matt. He's brilliant. I took him to the Darien Gap. But Matt, he was talking about this at sea. I'm like, this is how the brainwashing works too. They just keep going up and up and up. And those of us who resisted the first time, we tend to become we become far more resistant to their information more as time goes on. We built up like a viral resistance, right? Our immune system, our mental immune system is stronger and stronger. We resist it more. But the people who keep falling for it, they're weaker and weaker, actually. And so you can get their amplitude higher and higher and higher. And then eventually they come and they kill us, right? And they wipe us out because they know they can't win us. We're too strong. We have become stronger by virtue of their constant attacks, which we've somehow managed to, resist. And now it's like second nature. It's like we can hit your tennis balls right on back to you. You know what I mean? We're not going to fall for it, right? And so they kill us, right? And so, but in any case, when it comes to the Joe Rogan thing and others that I've declined, I say, I'm not going on Dope Smoker Show. I'm not going on shows where somebody gets up and he is a clear operator. He is clearly operating for the other side. He's clearly advertising dope and getting drunk as, I'm a big MMA guy. I can whip everybody and let's get drunk. Let's talk about doing mushrooms. Let's talk about doing this. When his studio is in Austin, Texas, and right down the street from him is that border. I took Bret Weinstein down to the Darien Gap, and Bret was on Joe Rogan's show and talking about his experiences in Darien Gap. And Bret did an excellent job explaining. He was very excellent in the jungle. That man loves the jungle. He did his PhD down there. And Dr. Weinstein was on his show and he did a great job explaining it, but I'm watching Joe Rogan go, whoosh. He always goes, whoosh, wow, whoa, why would they do that? And just lacking the ability to say, what are we doing? They're destroying our country, right? We're being destroyed. But Joe Rogan's response is, Wow. Whoa. Let's go to the next topic. And the next show, it's got some doper rock guy on, and they're talking about the best way to grow dope or something, right? So this is the form of information we're going. Again, the super dopers, and I've become incredibly conservative as I get older, right? I mean, in the past, I was like, if you want to smoke dope, go ahead, go ahead. You run off and smoke dope. And but now I've got to the point where it's like, this is a weapon. They're killing our young people with it. We can't fight. We can't fight because our young people think it's cool to smoke dope and watch Joe Rogan and be alcoholics, while these high testosterone Pashtun men and Chinese that will whip you down. And they're coming here for the express purpose of war. Everybody should read the book. I hate to say everybody should read this book, but who should be calling me this late at night? Is somebody calling you, or is that me?
Not me.
Oh, not me.
Yeah, and I can't hear it actually.
Strange. That's strange. Nobody's calling me. It's just ringing. Anyway, I just turned off my other devices. Anyway, so anyway,
let me ask you something. What do you think? So obviously we're in a really bad situation right now. What should individual Americans, who obviously can't change the culture, can't change the political system, can't defund these NGOs that are financing all this stuff, what should they do now? What should they be doing?
I think different solutions for different people. I mean, I don't see America changing. And I have to be like a dispassionate doctor. Like, I'm a medical doctor and I'm diagnosing my own family, and I've been doing this for 30 years, and I can't go in and go, well, they can't be sick because they're my family. I have to just be very dispassionate and remove myself from it. And removing myself from America, although I'm deeply American, that's why I returned to the United States in 2020, because I'm like, man, my own country's going to war. And I come back and I'm like, and my country's drugged up. I'm smelling marijuana everywhere in the elevators in Washington, D.C. and everywhere. And people are acting crazy and road raging. And anyway, when I'm just being dispassionate, and I don't see Americans standing up. I'm not seeing it. There are some, but the critical mass is not doing it. Just like the Irish, just like the Germans. And they're like, oh, those bad Germans. I'm like, pay attention. Keep saying, don't mess with Texas. That border does not exist. And if you're in Texas, you're not far from the border, right? Well, you're in Texas, you could be far from the border, but you can drive there in one day, no matter where you're at in Texas, right? And the border's open. It doesn't exist. Why does a person from Florida have to come in from Asia to go to the Texas border to help defend the border? I'm from Florida. I came in literally from Asia, where I'd just been many years fighting China, actually. And now I'm in Texas defending your border. Seriously. This is like Alamo 102, I guess. Here we go again, where the foreigners from other states come in and help defend the Alamo. And I mean, Texas is my America too, right? But the bottom line is, they're just not. And Border Patrol even though there's many patriots in Border Patrol, they leak like crazy. I mean, they leak like the rains from the sky, because there's so many that don't want this to be happening. But at the end of the day, one retired Army colonel, his name was Al Johnson. He was in his 80s. I used to love to talk. We'd talk all day long, right? I work with his son. His son's a former Army officer too that served in Iraq, but we worked together fighting China for years now. But I like to talk with his dad, because his dad's so brilliant. And his dad, we were talking one day in a coffee shop, and he goes, Michael, organizational structure dictates outcome. I was like, hold on, say that again. Let's go through this and let's discuss this. And that was a brilliant little statement. Organizational structure dictates outcome, which I think you two can see this immediately. A lot of others don't quite get it. In other words, all these gears that we have on the table, let's call those people. And the people who can arrange things and do businesses and the military, they know how to arrange the gears to do the activity that they want. Do we want it to be a gear that moves water, or do we want it to be a gear that moves a fan, or do we want it to be a gear that tells time? But the people will do their job as a gear. Click, 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 right? And the Border Patrol, when they're loading the buses, they're just being a gear. And when you talk with them, they're loading the buses with the aliens invading, which I've seen this all across the border. And they're like, yeah, man, I got to get my retirement. I'm like, you're not going to get your retirement. You understand? You're loading the buses with the people who are going to kill us, right?
And they're going to get your retirement a lot. They're going to get your retirement.
Exactly. I've been through this, and some of them see it, but they're like, I'm like, what am I supposed to do? I'm like, well, I came all the way from Florida, actually Asia. I wouldn't say that, but that's where I actually came from to be here to like tell you, you know what I mean? And I mean, I see this in other places. I mean, this is going to kill us. This is cancer. It's going to destroy. Demographics is our future, right? And so they're basically gears that don't know what time it is, right? When I was in the army stationed in Germany, I was in a place called Bad Tolz, Germany. And the tiny base that we were in was an old SS officers training base, right? And at that point it was special forces, right? And so this sort of castle that we were in, sort of a castle, it's called a caserne, right? Huge, thick walls, and our team room was underground and that sort of thing. And we would often talk because that place was made by people from Dachau concentration camp. So we often talked about how did they get the Germans to do this stuff? Like I would never load those trains. I'd be shooting the hell out of those people. You know what I mean? I'd never load up the trains with people to go to a death camp. I'd be fighting back, right? And now I see how it happens. Now I see the most of the U.S. military is just going along. One of the commanders, the CENTCOM commander now, Eric Krilla, I know him. I was in combat with him for 5 months. I was with him when he got shot right in front of me and continued to fight. I know him well, right? He's a very serious man. And now he's the CENTCOM commander and highly competent in combat and very smart, very courageous. And now he just goes along with the program. I mean, you wouldn't want Eric Carrillo to be looking for you. He will find you, right? But he's now part of the beast. Among all the other officers I've seen go that direction, and others don't. Others stand up, and of course their careers are over. But Eric is the one that bothers me the most because he was the best combat leader I've ever seen, and I've seen a lot of combat. I spent 5 months in combat with him, right? And serious combat. The battalion that he was in Mosul in Iraq that he led, he was the battalion commander, was the most decorated battalion in the entire Iraq war. We took I was just there as a war correspondent, took 183 casualties in that battalion. He was the last one. He happened to be shot right when they were ripping out. In other words, relief in place, another unit was coming in. So Eric got shot, broke a femur in half, continued to fight on the ground and that sort of thing. And then I stayed until the next unit ripped in, and then I went off with another unit.
And you did,
but
now
he's a
in that incident.
Commander.
In that incident, you also ended up as a war correspondent, ended up picking up a rifle because, I read that episode just the other day. It's pretty extraordinary. I'm sure you got in a little trouble for it, but it shows your character, I think.
It was problematic. But you're not supposed to pick up a rifle and join a fight, but Eric was shot, and then there was hand-to-hand combat going on, and a lieutenant refused to fight, and I found a rifle in the ground, and the lieutenant, my get out of jail free card actually was I picked up the rifle, I checked it, and it was black, right? It was an M4, and black meaning the bolt was locked to the rear. It was out of ammo because the sergeant major had done a mag dump. He hit this Al-Qaeda guy named Khalid Yassim Noah. I still remember his name. He hit him 4 times, like point blank, as far as from here to the camera, maybe a little bit further. It was very close, right? And hit him 3 times in the abdomen and blew a testicle off. That's why I hate M4s. I've never liked M4s. I've seen so many people shot by those things and they keep fighting. That guy was still standing. In the movies, if you get shot by an M4, you like fly out the window and roll down the road. But in real life, he was still standing trying to shoot his pistol. He had a ball blown off and shot 3 times in the stomach. Then they end up in hand-to-hand combat. So I found Prosser's rifle on the ground, and you read Gates of Fire, and I didn't have any ammo. I had a camera. And so I told the lieutenant to give me some ammo. So when he gave me the ammo, that was an Army officer giving me the ammo. So the Army, they gave me their tacit
they endorsed
approval.
the effort at the moment. Yeah.
So that was a sort of, and also, I was in fear for my life. Of course, I could have ran away, but I liked Eric. He was like very much liked him. Like huge respect for Eric. He's shot on the ground. His leg is broken in half, and he's like, there's bullets flying everywhere. And Rob Prosser's now doing hand-to-hand combat, and I'm the only one left to fight. So I mean, what are you supposed to do, man? I mean, if you got American soldiers getting shot up, you're gonna just run away from them? Not me, brother.
Yeah, I just bring it up just because I thought it was an impressive episode. So we're going a little long. Doug, are there anything specifically you want to ask Michael before we wrap it up for today? This has been very, very, very.
Oh, it's fantastic. We could talk to you for days, Michael. I mean, I wish we were in Okinawa now so we could just hang out and
come on over.
A lot more. But you've got to tell me, what should we do now? What should the average American do now? I mean, it's a critical situation.
I didn't answer that question. Now exactly. different answers for different people. I mean, if you're in a big city, it's time to get out. I mean, obviously, we're way past that time. Those cities are clearly being taken. If you're not going to fight for it, if you are not going to fight, you must leave or you will be taken. This is coming. This is the nature of these sorts of takeovers, right? The economy clearly is collapsing. And the Straits of Hormuz the Strait of Hormuz is not even closed yet, right? And we saw the Japanese economy take a crash into a mountain on Monday, as did quite a few others. And I'm sure you're tracking that better than most. And the oil is still flowing from the Mideast, right? What happens when that? Anyway, so the bottom line is there's a lot of context going on here, and not a lot of it's positive. And so whether it's economic collapse or these invasions that are going on, you're going to have to fight or flee. If you freeze, you'll probably die, or you'll certainly be a slave. And so what are you going to do? That depends on your personal situation. Certainly you need to organize around groups. It's very important that you organize with quality people. And cowards are natural traitors. Never let cowards into your inner circles. They are natural Dr. Smith, Lost in Space type characters. And this is old knowledge. This isn't me coming up with this, although I've seen it a lot. This is old knowledge that goes back since the oldest books I can read. Cowards are those close to you that become afraid. They'll sell you out, and that's it. So it's very important to be brutal in your estimates and who you let within your inner circles, right? And it's very important that you take significant action. Storing up 3 months of food, what's that going to do? Get you through a blackout if nobody comes and kills you and takes your food. But this is not a 3-month problem. I mean, the famines, which are clearly coming. Actually, I've talked about this in detail for years and studied it in detail. 3 months ain't going to do it. We have a systemic change unfolding. Nord Stream cut, Groningen cut. What could happen now? All these different things, fertilizer plants burning down, H5N1, chicken culling, food processing burning down, Japanese farmers going out of business, farmers being bought out in the UK and Australia and the United States and Canada and here as well. And so the strategic food supply capacity is going down intentionally. The globalists are turning out the lights because a depopulation is clearly coming, right? Clearly coming. So you have to realize that although all of our ancestors have been through many wars, everybody watching this, all of our ancestors have been in a lot of wars, a lot of pandemic and a lot of famine. All of us, we are, I mean, that's the tree we came from, but it's our turn now. And so you have to change the way your brain thinks. If you're doing any alcohol, if you're doing any drug, you should stop right now. I mean, stop, get rid of that crap and start paying attention. Get your mind clear, get fit and start paying very close attention and start paying attention to what is within your means. What actions can you do to ensure that and try to make as few moves as possible. In other words, you don't want to move to Virginia only to have to move somewhere else, right? People all the time are telling me they want to move to Panama. I'm like, why? Yeah, that's the last place in the world I'd move. Or maybe New York City is the last place, Chicago. And then after that, it would be Panama, right? I mean, you're just setting yourself up for you need to make, if possible, try to make a sniper shot and move to the place you want to spend the rest of your life, right? And And then if you have to move, then we got to be flexible. We're humans and we'll do it. But that's the thing you need to do is think it through. Everybody has different capacities. Like if you're Armenian, you might want to move back to Armenia. If you're Georgian, you might want to move back to Georgia. I was just over in Armenia and Georgia last year. Well, fine places except for Azerbaijan will want to take a slice out of Armenia. But the bottom line is different people have different abilities. Thai people might want to go back to Thailand. Japanese, I don't know if you want to come back here because although it's much nicer than the United States now, Japan is easily put into famine. 95% of the petroleum products are brought in. Most of the food is imported. This place can easily be tipped to famine. And Japan has experienced many, many famines. Misako Ganaha, research partner of mine, she found mention of, I think, 503 famines in about the last 1,500 years because we've been studying famine in Japan and, different things. But the bottom line is try to make a one-stop shopping. And it can depend. If you're from Guatemala, you might want to go back to Guatemala because I think Guatemala I was in Guatemala, this year or last year. That's a nice place. That's a place I would go on vacation. El Salvador too. There's a lot of places that you can go back to that are not going to be in the middle of a kinetic war. Because if you're in the United States, everything goes. If we get into a nuclear war, the United States is going to get nuked, right? I don't know that Guatemala would. I don't know what the radiation patterns would be and that sort of thing. But if the lights go out in the United States, all somebody has to do is turn our lights out. If our let me say something, just a couple more minutes. Maybe 2 months ago, the Chinese have invested heavily in the Ecuadorian power grid. I told Matt this the other night. They have invested heavily in the Ecuadorian power grid. Now, Quito, Ecuador is where most of the Chinese land who are coming through the Darien Gap through Colombia and Panama. And they arrive visa-free. They'll leave China. Often they'll go to Chiang Mai, to Turkey, down to Quito, right? So they've been arriving they can get visa on arrival. But the Chinese are causing problems in Ecuador. But remember what I said, China is a major investor in their electrical system. So about 2 months ago, and you can find this in the news, Ecuador said, okay, Chinese have to get a visa in advance. So the Chinese government said, well, I don't know what they said, but they were not happy with it. I remember that part. But the electricity went out for the entire country the next day. So the entire Ecuador was in a blackout. So they said you need to get visa before you show up, and they had a blackout. Whole country. Now imagine the United States. I don't know who all can turn our grid off. Maybe China. I think we've bought a lot of transformers from them and that sort of thing. Maybe they got a little switch they can flip. Russians are highly capable. We've got all sorts of highly capable enemies and other globalists who will be Americans can easily
exactly people in our own government.
And the main invasion engine for the United States is our government, straight up. And so if our electricity goes out, we're going into famine almost instantly. It'll start very quickly. Because that's it. If our electricity is out for 3 months, you're going to see a dramatic population reduction, right? And if it's out for 6 months or a year, it's road warrior stuff. So yeah. And so what can you do? You have to assess your own situation. Certainly you do need plenty of food and that sort of thing on hand, and your ability to defend yourself and your ability to defend yourself where you're at, but also depending where you're at, because everybody's situation is different. But certainly the life that you had before is over. And so you will either adjust to it and there's a high chance you'll do well, or you won't adjust to it and there's a high chance you're going to die.
One of the biggest things I've seen is that people are unable to turn the page after starting with the COVID stuff. It's like, no, the world is different now. I can't say in all ways how it's different, but we're not dealing with the same place at all anymore. And the sooner you accept that, the easier it is actually to move on.
That's right. And in a survival situation, the people who can adapt the quickest are typically the ones who survive. The ones who recognize, hey, the rules just changed. I have to throw out those old rules. Those are the ones who have a much higher chance of surviving. And this is what this is. We're talking survival. We're talking total authoritarian takeover, right? And it's a battle of oligarch. This is oligarchical structural fights going on. These are huge. And, you know, a lot of Americans seem to think like Trump is the big dog. He's going to rescue. It's like, he's nothing. He's a puppet on strings. And if they don't realize that, then they haven't reached a level of understanding yet that can even prepare them. Trump will not rescue anyone. Even if he was the best, most honest, strongest guy in the world, he would not be able to do it. And so it's just not happening. We are on our own wits and our own structures. And so develop your networks. Human networks are important. We're not made to live in caves alone. You know, some people can do it. But for most of us, we function as societies and groups, and that's the way we're made, right? I like people, you know, despite all these wars I go in for some reason, I still like people. I don't even know why, but I want to live around farmers and stuff. You know what I mean? Because those are the ones I always get along with.
Well, come to Uruguay.
Yeah.
Come to Uruguay.
Yeah,
Plenty of farmers here.
I'm thinking about it. Plus,
Yeah,
I
check
like
it out.
steak.
Got plenty of that. Doug, I interrupted you there.
No,
what were you
no.
gonna say? Wrap this up.
No, that's an open invitation. We both got farms down in Uruguay, and you'd be welcome to just come and hang out as long as you want, Michael. You'd enjoy it.
I might do that. I'll talk with you offline about that. And I just mentioned it to somebody a couple of days ago. I'm very serious about coming and seeing you.
Yeah, gotta check
Like,
it out.
highly
Okay.
serious.
Well, Michael, it's been a real pleasure to have you, sincerely. And I guess as this ongoing disaster unfolds, maybe we can get you to come back in the future and kind of update us on your perspective at the time.
Anytime. And I would really actually like to hear you more next time. Sometimes I need to talk, but other times, you know what I mean? 80%, 90%, you need to listen.
That's why you've got to come down to Uruguay and Argentina.
I'm looking at the books on your shelf. I'm like, yeah, we're going to get along.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Michael. Really appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank y'all. Bye.